Okay, folks, here we are. This is the autumn statement for the Chancellor, the summary of 2022. All the details are on this post, the key points themselves. Richard and I are on to discuss just now just what the implications are in terms of the housing market, in terms of the Fife housing market as well. I've also got the summary for Scotland. I'll be doing a detailed report on that later on, but and where we are in terms of the Fife and Scottish housing prices as of September 2022, which was released just a couple of days ago. Okay, so Richard, let's cover things. Taxation and wages in principle just now. UK minimum wage is actually quite an interesting one for people over 23. It's increased from £9.50 to £10.42 an hour. That literally takes somebody that's on a 37.5-hour week to £20,319 a year.
Yeah, I mean, wages have went up quite a lot, and we spoke about this recently, that the average, obviously, salary in Scotland, and especially in Fife, has went up considerably.
Yeah, over the last 20 years, hasn't it? Basically, it's doubled. It's almost doubled in price in terms of. But you haven't. Well, have we seen really a double in price in property prices? Possibly. Lower interest rates, though, comparison to what was before anyway. But 20,000 is no bad if it's if we're sticking to the. Remember, this is what they class as the UK minimum wage, but the national living wage, I think it is, they're referring to. Top 45% additional rate of income tax paid on earners now down to 125,140 rather than instead of 150,000. I wonder why they put it as 140 quid at the end of it. Why do you not just round it off to 125?
I know, I've looked at, sometimes we look at the stats and the figures and I'm like, why such a random number? Just round it up so it's a lot easier. Maybe it's just easier for us to talk about, but
maybe that's just to get people to remember it rather than actually just to go around numbers so it doesn't confuse anybody. So if you make it that sort of wee bit on the end, that psychological thing. But that's kind of, I mean, it's no good news for the high rate payers, obviously, but it's good news for actually the exchequer and the economy in terms of bringing money in. So, that sort of indication about the fact that we're going to bring it down and actually get tax off the higher rate payers is come sort of halfway, because I think it was down to 100,000 before with Liz Truss, but it's actually come halfway to 125,000. Balancing the books, really. You need the money to pay for somebody else, eh?
Yeah.
No surprise, income tax and personal allowances and higher rate thresholds frozen for a further 2 years until April 2028. So they've actually extended that another 2 years.
Additional 2 years on top.
Yeah. I mean, this is really the stealth taxes, isn't it? This is what they're doing, because instead of moving that lower rate, that personal rate up, what they're doing is they're actually just freezing it. Therefore, you're actually getting worse off every year because they're not giving you that extra bit anyway. Which kind of, we kind of got used to it. We kind of got expected it would happen. Maybe if the economy turns around quicker than usual, they might actually repeal that and they might reverse it. But for now, it's here to stay until 2028. So income tax, personal allowances and higher rate thresholds are frozen for a further 2 years. It'll be interesting to see how the Scottish Government actually, if they follow suit in some shape or form, because they've got different sort of thresholds and tax rates, haven't they?
Yeah, it would be interesting to see how that pans out. And also the main national insurance and inheritance tax thresholds are also frozen for a further 2 years until 2028.
That's a real bugbear for me. It's like people are buying their houses and they've got a huge amount of equity in their houses. And this is referring to the housing market. And then when they pass away, it goes into their inheritance tax. And fair enough, there's a threshold for the house that you own. But there's you also pay 40% on that money. So if that money then passes to the next generation, and just say they never spent it at all, or they went and bought another house, when they go as well, guess what? It gets taxed again. Yeah. So if you don't plan properly, you're effectively getting taxed on that money every single generation it passes, if you're passing it on as generational wealth. And if they're keeping it, a classic example is property investors with their assets, isn't it? So they pass that on, it gets taxed or anything like that. And then what happens is the next generation, if they don't mitigate their tax liability, they maybe don't use discretionary trusts or anything like that in order to mitigate that, or they don't do the proper planning first to pass it on to the next generation, then it basically gets taxed again and again and again and again.
You mentioned discretionary trusts and things there, Jim. We learned quite a lot about them at a recent event that we were at, about putting things into trusts in order to protect things as they passed down, obviously, through generation if you've got an investment portfolio and things.
Including the house that you own, so it's not
Yes.
taken in for care, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if you're joint owners, you can effectively, if one party goes, don't pass the what they were saying is don't pass the benefit of that property to your spouse.
Yeah, so it stays.
Pass it into a trust.
Yeah, like you said, we were talking about that, Jim, and you said about keeping it in the bloodline rather than, because you could see how things. I mean, people could work all their lives, build this up, and it could get lost out with the actual family line through marriage and things.
Yeah,
without having
that
protection.
is a classic to emphasize on that. Then it's good that you actually mentioned that. So what happens is it's typically if two people get together and they bought a house together, and one party unfortunately passes away, and then that person, and then they don't leave it; they just leave it to the other person, and they don't actually pass it on to the children that they've got just now. Then that party actually marries another person, and nothing's done about that asset. If that person that had the original assets in the first place, if they've not actually planned for it properly, that if they pass away, it will go to the person. It was nothing to do with them in the first place, and nothing to do with their children, their children that they had by bloodline and birth. And therefore, that money will then disappear down a route which actually has nothing to do with the family originally.
Yeah. And that all comes back to having proper wills and things in place. So,
anyway, so tax-free allowances for this. Oh, this is a killer. It's like we knew this was coming, didn't we? Because we talked about capital gains as well back in November 2018, and how the Office of Budget Responsibility had actually recommended dropping the threshold for capital gains allowances, which means for capital gains allowances next year, instead of having your £12,000 allowance or thereabouts, it's going to be cut to £6,000. And then the year after, from April 2024, your capital gains allowance is going to be cut to £3,000 on property. So if you're an investor and you're planning to sell or potentially sell to your limited company because it's currently in your name, you'd probably be better to do it now to utilise the whole capital gains this year. Because if you roll into next year, it'll be reduced to 6,000, and if you roll into the year after, it'll be just reduced to 3,000. So you need to do some planning right now if you're an investor or a second homeowner, if you're planning to sell in the next couple of years and you do have a capital gain liability, because you will lose out big time as a result of it. I mean, these are huge amounts, especially for a higher rate payer, which would be paying 28% on their gains. And then it would be getting cut by 6,000 and then a further 3,000 if they wait a couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically slashing it in half and then a year later slashing it in half again. So that's a big loss. I
knew it was coming. It was an easy target. It's going to raise, well, when we had done that show, it was potentially going to raise 18 billion at the 6,000 allowance. So if it's getting cut to 3,000, it's probably going to raise, I would imagine, about 24 billion into the exchequer over the next couple of years. Instantly enough, I didn't expect this, but it is happening. And I think the tax-free allowance for dividend income is going to disappear completely eventually. So what's happening is just now on a limited company, if all the shareholders can pay themselves up to £2,000, and the first £2,000 is tax-free.
Yeah.
What's going to happen is by next year, it's going to reduce to £1,000 tax-free. And then from April 2024, it'll only be £500 tax-free. It's not even worth keeping it, to be honest.
I know, I was just going to say.
They were removing it completely. But I didn't think you really wanted to do that. It just means all these self-employed traders that actually trade as a limited company can no longer get that tax allowance and get that, that £2,000 deduction. I mean, that's a lot of money to somebody. It's maybe just a sole trader and acting as a limited company sole trader. So it's it's a huge amount of money in terms of their income, and it'll be taxed again as at 8.5% of the amount. Instantly enough, though, dividends don't attract national insurance contributions, so there's an advantage to that by paying yourself by dividends, because you're not paying national insurance contributions like you do with PAYE.
Like you would with PAYE.
However, you're not actually, I'll be honest and upfront about this, people think it's like, oh, that's no fair, they're getting away with tax. They're not, because what's happening is the dividend that you pay isn't deductible against your profits on your limited company. So your limited company has to pay the whole corporation tax on the profit itself, that you
So
generate.
you're paying the tax that way.
Yes, and then you're paying. So what you're doing is you're moving the liability for your personal tax onto your limited company tax. So you're still paying the same amount. So that's generally what happens. So when people say that's no fair, they've no paid any tax this year. Yeah, but their limited company's probably paying the tax for them. So all in all, the exchequer's getting the same amount of money, and that's probably why on the bigger scale of things, you don't see anybody getting pursued for anything. Energy.
Yeah, energy's a hot topic.
So what's happening with this then?
Well, household energy price caps extended for 1 year beyond April, but made less generous, with typical bills capped at 3,000 a year instead of the 2,500.
This is quite interesting because it's going to be capped at 3,000 for the next 12 months from March onwards, so April onwards, basically.
Yeah, April,
so it's going to be capped at 3,000, but they think the average bill is going to be 3,700 anyway. So you're still going to have to pay another £700 over and above what we're expected to pay just now, in terms of that value. And interestingly enough, though, they're actually means testing households on benefits, and they will get a £900 support payments in the next year to help them out. So again, means tested. So they're kind of targeting the less well off in our society, which is what they were hoping would actually happen. And the money was going to the people that actually needed it rather than the people that just wanted it. £300 disability payments to pension households and £150 for individuals on disability benefit as well. Windfall tax on profits for oil and gas firms increased from 25% to 35% and extended until March 2028. I think they have to exercise that, though, do they not? They have to actually say that they're going to put a windfall tax on.
I was going to say they're going to have to do that,
Yeah, I don't think they actually just say, oh, by the way, you get a windfall tax.
No,
I think they actually have to tell them in advance. It's like, no, you are an oil and a gas company, you'll get it. Unless somebody else can tell us out there somewhere, if you want to put in the comments, if that is just mandatory anyway, right across the board for all the gas and oil firms currently in the UK. But I don't think that might not necessarily be the case. Anyway. Quite interestingly enough, on energy as well, new temporary 45% tax on companies that generate electricity to apply from January. So that, again, you can see where they're bringing the money in and see where all the taxes are coming in. What about Office, the Economy and Public Finances? What's happening there?
Yeah, the Office for Budget Responsibility judges UK to be in recession, meaning that the economy has slowed to 2 quarters in a row.
And yet, it's not. It's just 0.1 just now. So,
so
even the Chancellor stood up when I was watching the autumn statement, and he said, we're there's no doubt about it, we're in recession. And I'm like, do you know something about it? They've obviously not released public figures yet, and that's why they're saying it. We're in recession, so just get prepared for it. Does this mean we really have to cut back? Not necessarily. They're more optimistic, and we'll get to some of the figures later on. They're more optimistic than actually originally thought, and what the media and television says. So that's quite an interesting one. So they says that's going to slow. It predicts growth for the year overall will be 4.2%, but the size of the economy will shrink by 1.4% by 2023. So they are expecting it to shrink. 1.4% doesn't sound a lot, and I know in the scope of billions, it probably is a big number, but it doesn't sound a lot. I mean, if your business shrunk by 1.4%,
just going to say on the smaller scale, it's not such a big impact.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a self-employed person and you had 100,000 turnover and it shrunk by 1.4%, which is 1,400 quid, you'd kind of be breathing a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
Think to yourself, I've done okay considering the recession it's meant to be here. So the other one as well. So how do you think that? How will that affect the rental market? Do you think any of this stuff so far will affect the rental market? The fact of the energy prices and the caps and the support payments as well is quite interesting for people on benefits.
Yeah, we've already started to see the effects of the cost of living and energy prices and things having an effect on people's spending power, and what people are being a lot more cautious about. What kind of properties they're looking at. They're thinking ahead of like, what's the energy on this property going to cost me? Do you know what I mean? And on the long term, is this going to be too expensive for me to run? And we're looking at that as well with people's finances, because I mean, people that may not be in that mind space and think, oh, I want this property, but really need to think about, right, here's your income, this is what's going to cost you to run it. Do you know what I mean? There's no point in us putting a tenant in place where we know maybe 4 or 5 months down the line they're going to be in a position where they're struggling. But a lot of people are kind of savvy to that fact as well, and it's shifted people's view on what properties they're looking at and what they think is suitable for them now, as we see houses maybe start to slow down slightly and flats and apartments become more popular again.
Yeah. Good news is they're actually seeing the growth of 1.3% and 2.6%, 2.7% in 2024, 25, and 26.
Yeah.
So the next year, what we're seeing is we're going to be predicting a slight decrease, but the years after they're predicting actually growth again, back to growth.
Yeah.
So it's kind of happy days in terms of where we are, and stability more than anything. UK's inflation rate is actually, this is an interesting one, because UK inflation rate is obviously right now 11.1%.
11 point, yeah.
Yeah. So if the UK inflation rate is 11.1%, and the unemployment rate is 3.6%, this is quite interesting that they actually say that the inflation rate they think should actually be predicted to be 9.1% by the end of the year and 7.4% by the end of next year. So they're actually taking quite a prudent approach to the fact that, which makes me think that the Bank of England isn't going to be as mercenary as everybody thinks in terms of increasing base rates, especially if because you know how they've got their target at 2%, but if they're saying the end of 2023, they think it's going to be 7.4. I can't see them then cutting right in and making major increases in the base rate. I can't see them doing that. I think this is a slowing ship, as I said, and as we come into the harbour, which is effectively 2023 and 2024, they're taking a more progressive long-term strategy to this, and they're actually not looking at the short-term implications about saying, let's get this paid off quick, let's get this down quickly, because it's at the expense of possibly the housing market, the rental market, and also the jobs market, isn't it?
Yeah, and then they've said, you mentioned about unemployment there as well, and unemployment's expected to rise from 3.6. You said it was about 3%, 3.6% up to 4.9% in 2024.
And yet, 2 weeks ago, I heard that it was going to double to 7.7%. Yeah, and that's the thing. So, I mean, and I know it's all really semantics when you think about it, and I know it's people's lives when we're talking about it as well, and their jobs when we're talking about it. But full employment in economic terms is determined between 4 and 6%. So if full employment is between 4 and 6%, and if they think unemployment is expected to rise to 4.9% by 2020 and 2024, then we're still technically in full employment in terms of economic terms, which means actually the economy will be doing quite well in comparison. And most people will actually retain their jobs if that's the case. And you know yourself that more and more people, we've just talked about this recently, and we've talked about it private as well, as more and more people are actually seeing my generation and just above my generation actually retiring early. Therefore, they're leaving huge gaps in the labour market.
Jobs,
for the younger generation to have to come in and train, and also for automation to come in as well. So it's actually maybe it won't be 4.9% because of these implications and the fact that all these people have come out the job market. It might be the case that what they'll have to do is the people that supposedly retired might have to come back to work because of the price of inflation and everything else going up. And the prediction was, I retired 1 year ago, but now I'm going to have to go back to work because on my pension I can't afford to do that. But we'll talk about how that affects things. So government will give itself the 5 years to hit debt and spending targets instead of the 3 years currently. So they're doing exactly what we were advising about people with mortgages. In other words, in order to reduce your short-term costs, your short-term cash flow, and increase your short-term cash flow, your short-term costs, and increase your short-term cash flow every single month, is actually ask your mortgage company if they can actually push out the end of mortgage date, therefore making a longer mortgage term, therefore making a longer term to pay down that loan on capital repayment, therefore reducing your monthly cost every single month as well. Actually, maybe putting another, a couple of £100 in your pocket every single month, which is better in your pocket, which is another 2,400 a year, which is pretty good in consideration to the fact that,
pretty good.
You know, when you think about energy prices going up and that can go to that, and then also food bills have gone up as well, so that can go to that as well. So there's a way there to alleviate that position for most people with mortgages, which accounts for round about, if I off the top of my head, round about 56% of the population or people with houses. 56% of people with houses.
Yeah, it's a really good approach. And although people might think, oh, but that's stretching out my mortgage term, but in the short term, it's providing extra cash and it's also reducing your payments. So it's kind of win-win. Yeah, it is.
If what I would advise, what I would do personally, this is what I would do, and this is what I've done, and I always say this to people, is the money's in your pocket is better sitting in your pocket right now, rather than actually being paid down. And at least if you get to the end of a certain period of time, then if you've still got that money, you can pay it down against your capital repayment mortgage anyway, and therefore reduce the actual debt overall. So you know, what I'm trying to say is just keep it to yourself now, just in case. And that's why we do interest only as landlords. We do interest only mortgages for the very reason it alleviates the cash flow every single month. And then at the end of the year, if you've got a built up amount of capital in your bank, and you choose to reduce the debt, then you can, because you've got it. But if you've got a repair that you have to get done, like, for example, your boiler or your roof, or there's been a flood, or there's been, you know, anything's happened, your heating system or anything like that's gone down, at least you've got the money aside to actually repair it. Whereas if you've paid all your mortgage down and you've got nothing left in the bank, you're struggling.
You're going to be left, you're going to be left in that situation. Where are you going to find the money to carry out things like that? Yeah.
Absolutely, I agree. So, government spending, what's happening there? I mean, government spending shouldn't affect that much, but it's good to actually see in terms of how they're planning, in terms of how confident we are about the UK economy.
Yeah, I mean, government spending, obviously, defence spending is to be maintained at 2% of the national income, which is a NATO target. And
I still think we shouldn't spend any money on defence, but you've got to think about the bigger picture. Imagine they turn around and says we're going to cut the defence spending by 0.5%. Okay, now if 0.5% might represent billions, and we might be actually spending that money with UK companies in defence, like Ferranti, like GC, you know, all these different people. You know, Hughes Electronics. I'm not really. I mean, they've got places in this country anyway, and they've got workers in this country. So if the government cuts back on defence spending, they were spending it with these companies. Therefore, people will lose their jobs. So there is a bit. There's a bit of that as well. You know, to stabilise and keep the economy on the right track.
Yeah, and also the government spending. You've got overseas aid spending. Now that's been kept at the current 0.5% for the next 5 years. But that is below the official 0.7 target.
Yeah. But again, it's the same scenario as what we talked about defence spending. I know it's not exactly the same, but when you put money towards to overseas aid and stuff like that, you're still employing people. You're still providing all these services. Overseas aid typically buys all their stuff from the people that actually provide their funding. So it's like you're almost saying, there you go, I'm going to help you. But by the way, you're going to be buying their Land Rovers and their cars and their, you know, our medical stuff and, you know, all our vaccines and everything like that with that money. So you're giving it so they can spend it back. Exactly what we do with laptops for schools. You know, laptops for schools, we make a contribution to laptops for schools. Laptops for schools has raised over £100,000 towards providing laptops for schools. And then as soon as we make that contribution, they go and buy laptops, they give them back to us, and we distribute them to the primary schools in our community. So overall, we're giving it to get it back.
Yeah, and I think the laptops for schools thing's a really good. It's a brilliant cause. And like you say, you're giving it to give it back, and it works both ways.
So in terms of Scottish property prices, I'll give a quick indication about the average Scottish property price in Scotland now. This is the UK House Price Index. This is the Office of National Statistics, the Scottish registrars. This is the actual figures. None of your make-up stuff from Zoopla and Rightmove and Halifax and nationwide, all different parameters. This is actually boots on the ground. This is all the figures together in a summation. So the average house price in Scotland is actually going up to 191,941 192 grand, to be honest.
Yeah.
So that then takes our multiplier, if I can get my calculator, because, you know, the average salary in Scotland is about 31,000. So if we take 191, 1, 2, 3, no, 192 we said, 92, 1, 2, 3, divided by 31. Yeah, you're on top about 6.2 times, which is really healthy for a housing market.
And we spoke about this yesterday, Jim. So about 5 or 6 times into the salary is still a healthy market.
And the annual price change for Scotland on an annualised basis so far is still 7.3% more than what it is the 12 months previously. So it is coming down because prices are now levelising, levelling off, and they're actually restating, aligning to where they were from the year before, with all the home reports adding on to that. So it's quite healthy as well. You don't want a booming market all the time. You want it to stabilise at some point in time. In terms of the Fife housing market, the average price in Fife is 73,000. No, 73,000. I wish it was.
I was just going to say.
I'll buy everything. 173,000. You just missed out 100,000 divided by 31,000. 5.5 times.
Yeah,
that is extremely healthy for a Fife housing market for the average price. So it's very, very affordable still in terms of people and affordability in Fife, and more people are choosing. So year on year, the Fife market is actually gone is 8.3% more. Some of the markets like Argyll and Butte have gone up 25%. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So that 8.3% represents roughly about another 13. About another 13,000 extra. So your average house price last year was 160,000 at this time. It's now 173,000 this time. So another 13,000 on top of that. If you're an investor, happy days. You've made another 13,000 on your money. If you're just a house owner, it's all relative, because it just means you're going to have to pay 8.8
the same when you move on to your next place.
If you're a downsizer, happy days, because your price has gone up and it's probably higher than the one that you're going to buy. Therefore, the marginal difference you're going to gain in your pocket if you're downsizing. So at this point in time in a rising market, typically I would advise people that want to downsize to sell right now, because they'll make the huge gain on the downsize. Whereas, in a declining market, it's usually people that want to buy up the way. It's the better the way around. So a declining market, if you want to upgrade, you upgrade to something that's maybe a 10% drop in price, just for scenario purposes. You're paying 10% less if it was 200,000, so that'd be 20 grand less. But you're maybe selling a house at 100,000, which is 10 grand less. So you've dropped by 10 grand. You're gaining a property drop by 20,000. Therefore, you've actually gained on a declining market by 10,000 by upgrading. So that's typically the rule of thumb about where we are right now. Any final words, Richard, for yourself? What your thoughts are, how things are, how you think things are going to go?
Yeah, in terms of obviously we looked at I think the wages and the energy costs and things. There obviously is a lot of changes there. I think quite a lot of positive in terms of how wages have increased over the years, especially, over the last 20 years, but especially over the last few years as well. Energy prices are having an effect on people's perception and spending, but it's not all doom and gloom. I think that we've looked at a lot of stats in this show and previous shows and things as well about how things aren't as they are perceived or to be on the media and things. So it's quite a positive outlook if you look at the correct facts and figures and some good stats there.
Yourself in a spreadsheet, it maybe looks great and it maybe works out, but the reality is what happens outside of what we can't control affects overall the outcome of what's going to happen in the next couple of years and into the future as well. But hopefully more positive than ever before. I'm kind of feel more bullish about the situation as well. And I think the housing market will still remain stable as a result. It will be interesting to see how the Scottish government reacts. They're getting extra funding, by the way, up to 1.7 billion for education and health service, because the UK government is actually spending more on their education and health service as well. So that's probably good news for Scotland as well.
That is good news about education. I had a really interesting conversation with someone about education today in England, and the struggles that the education sector and things is having down there. It's a shame.
It's absolute lunacy not investing in the future of your children. It's like it's almost like cutting your legs off, and then expecting to walk quite easily. It's an absolutely crazy idea not to invest in education properly and fund it properly and have the right resources in place, because all you're doing is then making it worse for the people that are actually going to run our economy and run our whole system later future, on by not educating them properly. You can see that in most countries that are actually no education system at all, where it almost is poverty-stricken and barbaric. And there's two extremes. There's like the super rich, and then there's the absolute poverty. There's no in between because of that.
Side by side, and it's just
and that's it. Thanks for coming on the show, Richard. Thought I'd give a quick update on the autumn statement. If anybody's got any questions or wants to make any comments later on, please feel free to do it. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you.